Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's show, aviation mystery. 1 year after flight MH370 disappeared over the Indian Ocean, family members of the victims are still waiting for answers. But how long can the search continue? And tourists spark tension. Hong Kong residents, some of them are protesting against Chinese mainland holidaymakers as the island considers electoral reforms put forward by Beijing. And we begin today's show with the 1 year anniversary of flight MH370 going missing. This Sunday marks the 12 months since MH370 disappeared off the radar in the South China Sea. Last year saw an unprecedented multinational search across 1 million square miles, costing tens of millions of dollars. It has turned out to be one of the biggest aviation mysteries of all time, some say. A year on, the plane is still missing. For more on the upcoming events marking the 1 year anniversary, we are joined by our correspondent Ryan Meltzer in Kuala Lumpur. Ryan, any information at this moment that would help us to understand, is there going to be any hope of any result of the current search on the 1 year anniversary?
Well, we have to count on what the experts are telling us, and this is what the families feel too, is that they are basically reliant on this data that we've got from the Inmarsat satellite, these pings that tell us that the plane, or tell the experts that the plane ended up in the southern Indian Ocean. But there is deep skepticism among the family members. I don't know whether it's only the family members that are willing to speak to the media that are expressing this, but it seems that every family member that we speak to doubts the official theory that the plane went down in the southern Indian Ocean. And as time goes on, as the months go by, as they continue searching this priority area, now 40% of the priority area searched and still no sign of the plane, their skepticism only deepens all the time.
I see. We understand at this moment, Ryan, there are some family members of those that are missing from MH370 now inside Kuala Lumpur. They are asking for answers. Can you help us to understand what is going on with them during their trip this time in Malaysia, and also what are they getting from the airline and also from the safety board?
Well, it was a few days after the Department of Civil Aviation declared that the disappearance of flight MH370 was an accident with the presumed loss of all lives, that a couple of groups of Chinese next of kin came to Malaysia. Some of them had been here earlier, right after the disappearance of the plane, but a couple of new groups came over here, and they were looking for answers. They were looking to try to meet with senior government officials. They didn't get very far. They did meet with the CEO of Malaysia Airlines, and they've been pushing for answers, and above all, they've been pushing for the government to rescind its declaration of an accident, because they feel this is like giving up hope on their relatives. And many of them have opted to stay on here in Malaysia to mark the anniversary with the Malaysian families whose loved ones were also on board MH370.
Ryan Meltzer, our correspondent in Kuala Lumpur, thank you very much. And now let's take a look back at the key developments.
Kelly Wen was in Kuala Lumpur on January 29th when the Department of Civil Aviation chief declared the disappearance of MH370 an accident with the presumed loss of all lives on board, including her husband. It's a conclusion she just cannot accept.
I wish the authorities would give us the truth. I don't believe such a big plane as that can just drop into the southern Indian Ocean with no wreckage, no bodies, no luggage.
As Chinese New Year approached, several more Chinese next of kin arrived, seeking answers they weren't getting at home from Malaysian authorities.
18 family members from China have been staying at this suburban hotel. They're people whose husbands and mothers were on board flight MH370, but most of them are parents who have lost their only child.
For some of those parents, the hurt is still as raw as it was 1 year ago. The next of kin went to the Malaysia Airlines headquarters to demand the government withdraw its accident declaration.
We've suffered great misfortune. We covered our own expenses ourselves coming here. Malaysia Airlines did nothing. We made the long journey here from China, and now they just want to see 3 of us. It's unreasonable.
3 of the group were eventually able to meet the Malaysia Airlines CEO. Most have opted to stay and spend the anniversary of the plane's disappearance here with the Malaysians whose loved ones were also on board the flight.
The pain we have gone through, we are searching for them for 1 year. We are exhausted. We have faced so many problems emotionally in our daily life. Everything.
Wen says she believes her husband is still alive and that while others may give up hope, she is determined to wait for him to return. Ryan Meltzer, CCTV, Kuala Lumpur.
And now let's take a look back at the key developments in the search for the MH370.
On March 8th last year, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at 41 minutes past midnight local time. It was scheduled to arrive in Beijing at 6:30 a.m, but the plane's signal was last seen turning westwards at 2:14 in the morning. There were 239 passengers and crew on board, including 153 Chinese and 50 Malaysians. On March 15th, the Malaysian government confirmed the plane's ACARS system was deliberately turned off and that the route could have been changed manually. 5 days later, Australia said possible debris had been sighted in the southern Indian Ocean. In April, Australian and Chinese vessels using underwater listening equipment detected ultrasonic signals, which officials believed could have been from the plane's black box flight recorders. However, in late May, Australian officials announced that the search had found nothing in the area and could be ruled out. On June 26th, officials announced a new 60,000 square kilometre search area, some 1,800 kilometres west of Perth, Australia. In August, after detailed mapping of the seabed, Australian authorities said the areas were of particular interest and priority, and the search could take up to a year. On January 29th this year, Malaysia declared that the aircraft's disappearance was an accident and all people on board were presumed dead. The declaration allowed compensation payments to be made to relatives of the victims. Almost 1 year on, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott said he is unable to promise the search will go on forever, but he assured that the Australian-led search effort will do its best to solve the mystery.
And for more on the missing plane, we are joined in the studio by Professor Qin Huaping. She is from China University of Political Science and Law. She's, of course, going to explain us from the legal perspective. Meanwhile, joining us in Washington, D.C., we have Mr. Mark Weiss, who is a former pilot and civil aviation expert from the Spectrum Group. And also in Washington, we have Mr. Robert Francis, former vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. He's been involved in several investigations into aviation accidents. Welcome to all of you. First of all, may I ask you, Mr. Weiss, as an experienced pilot who have been in a company that has been assisting the search of some previous accidents, what do you think of the current stage of development, which is no information, no new development?
Well, I'm not so sure that that's something to be that concerned about at this moment. You know, the fact that the search is continuing this far after the accident, and the fact that it's been refined for a different search area gives me hope that this will continue, and hopefully something will be found further down the road. So I still have that positive feeling that the information has been viewed, reviewed constantly, and now the search is being refined. So I have more optimism now than I had months ago.
Really? Mr. Francis, what is your feeling? Only because the search is going on and therefore there's likely to be conclusion?
I would agree with my colleague. I think that it's remarkable what has gone on. I think that it's wonderful that people are willing to finance the continuing search. I think that it was appropriate that the decision was made that these people were no longer living, given what the implications of that for monetary compensation. So things like this go slowly, and this is an enormously complicated, very international effort that's going on, and I think we have to accept the fact that it's not going to happen in a month or 2 months.
But we imagine yourself, Mr. Francis, in the shoes of the relatives of those that have been missing from the plane. Is patience the thing we need, or rather something else at the moment?
Well, I think that they've lost their loved ones a year ago, and I think that I certainly cannot say that I understand the position that they're in, but I think that I doubt that there's unanimity in terms of the relatives and as to whether the search could continue or not continue.
Right.
Some think that it should continue, some don't.
Right. Mr. Weiss, what do you think should be the result of the search? I'm not suggesting specific results, like what can we learn, but rather what should be the nature of the search for the next stage if the search is still going on? Is it about the people involved? Is it about a lesson for aviation industry? Is it about how to deal with an accident when they involve multiple players, multiple countries? What are we searching for now in that operation?
Well, I think you have to really take this on an overall perspective. I think what you really need to look at, and when you focus that attention on your question, what is it that we're trying to gain from this? You know, certainly the fact that the search is continuing, and I think everybody really needs to understand that the search just isn't going on haphazardly, that the area has continually been refined based upon continuous viewing of the information and reviewing of the information. You certainly, for the families involved, you want to have some closure. And, you know, you don't want to take away hope. I understand that. But when you base it on evidence, everything appears to look as though it was the aircraft ended up in the South Indian Ocean. Now then you want to look at what could have been the causes of that. And you're not going to be able to determine that until you have the forensics on the aircraft itself or people or bodies from the wreckage.
All right. And
so,
therefore,
you know, I think that's the final hope.
Right. All of us are talking about this as an outsider. Only those relatives of those that are missing from the plane, they know exactly what it's like to wait for someone to go home, and they know what exactly it is to have someone else declare their beloved one possibly do not exist in this world anymore. And they know exactly what it's like to have no conclusion about for their beloved ones and why they passed away. So let me ask you, Professor Chen, you're coming here as a legal expert. Many of the Chinese family members of those missing from MH370, they're trying to look for answers, and they're angry, understandably. I mean, for whoever is running into this situation would be very emotional. One of the things they complain about is the liaison office that they were told to keep in contact with, which is made of the individuals coming from the Malaysian airline and also individuals coming from the Malaysian Safety Board, Transport Safety Board. Actually, according to them, are not providing any information to them throughout the process of search. So they are angry about it. Is there anything, do you think, that they have the legal rights about? During this process, what are their legal rights? What should be the other players do in order to make sure their legal rights are being protected?
So first, we also would like to show the sympathy to the families who lost their loved ones. So in terms of the legal perspective, legal aspects, so based on the information you provided, I think the next of kin of the passengers may claim the compensation against the airline company.
First of all, it's not a compensation, it's access for information during the investigation, which is still going on because the search is still going on. What kind of legal rights do they have in terms of access to information?
So currently, I don't think the passenger's family may file the litigation against somebody because, according to the information issued by the authority of Malaysia government, so the search is still continuing. So the government do something. So I don't think they may file the litigation against any authority currently.
And you don't think they have any legal rights to know any information during this process?
They have
and if they're
rights.
not being informed, and therefore how their rights could be protected. I'm just asking because of information available in the press reports that some of them are not necessarily thinking they have access to information available should be to the relatives. And therefore, as a legal expert, I'm asking you, what kind of rights do they have?
So they may claim the compensation if they really do not get any assistance or any help from the liaison office. So they may claim this kind of compensation. But for the information publication, so they may only contact with the authority. So this is only
there, Mr. Francis, an information divide between the searching, those players that might have access to the latest information about the search, for example, the airline company, for example, the safety board, organizations inside Malaysia or elsewhere that are participating in the search, and as a result, what rights do the relatives of those missing should have access to?
I think that the relatives should have access to whatever concrete, verified information is available. Some are going to be more demanding than others. Some are going to want different kinds of things. But I think it's the responsibility of the institutions that are dealing with this to give them whatever they have that the family members want.
On the other hand, Mr. Wise, concrete and verifiable information, those are wonderful adjectives, but very hard to define. And it's very hard for anyone from outside those institutions, as Mr. Francis mentioned, to be able to judge whether there is any verifiable and concrete information regarding the search. So, therefore, can anyone be of assistance to the relatives of those missing during this process for them to judge whether there's access to them or whether there's any information, in fact?
Well, from the very, very beginning, there's been a credibility gap with the way this whole investigation has been handled by the Malaysian government. There's been misinformation, missteps, and I think no matter what information, quite honestly, would be currently given out to the families, there's always going to be in the back of everybody's mind, is this really true or am I being pacified? I firmly believe, of course, here in the United States, information is much more forthcoming to families. They become part of the team through the investigation. You certainly still don't see that available in this incident. I would hope that after all of this time that the families and the investigating parties can come together to get, as Mr. Francis has said, credible evidence. What have we found? What have we not found? And why? Why do we feel this way? This isn't just throwing darts in the air. This is something based upon evidence. And share that evidence and also understand and explain what went wrong with the investigation, what we've been looking for.
Mr. Francis, are those fair questions to ask, or this is too much to ask for the Malaysian authorities? After all, they've been repeatedly explaining that this is a joint search operation. It is not just the Malaysian side that should play its role, but also all the others where the search operation is taking place. And also they've been talking about what they have known, according to them, to those relatives. So do you agree with what Mr. Weiss just said? And meanwhile, conspiracy theories are running all the time. We see that with any kind of accident. And shall we judge with these conspiracy theories?
I do agree with Mr. Weiss. I think that that the authorities owe to the families all the information that they have, of which they are certain. You know, concrete, proved evidence. And I don't think there's any reason for them to not have that. Now, there are always going to be, and I certainly lived through a lot of this, there are always going to be family members that are accusing the authorities of not giving them everything they've got or giving them false evidence. And that's something that investigators and authorities have to live with. But the answer to that is to give out to the families and to the public whatever is confirmed, concrete evidence.
Well, before we go, I want to have this final views coming from both of you before I go to our legal expert, is that what do you think should be the next stage of this search operation? What should be some of the concrete information? Do you think those that are participating in the search, that are responsible for the search, should give to the public, particularly to the relatives of those missing? Mr. Francis, very briefly from you first.
I think that, as I said, as the search goes on, that the authorities, whether it's the Australians or the Malaysians or whoever it is, should be giving to the families whatever evidence they are finding that is concrete and provable.
Right.
And I think they also should be very, very comprehensive in explaining to the families exactly what they are doing at a given time, what they have done, and what they plan to do.
I see. Mr. Weiss, without knowing anything about the conclusion of the investigation, of a search, but at this stage, 1 year anniversary, what can we really learn from this accident and things that followed later?
Well, I think a couple of things from that, really. I think one of the things is that we need better track and trace devices on board the aircraft so we know where they are at all times on our larger aircraft that fly over water. I think that information needs to be out there. I think we need better voice recorders, cockpit recorders, flight data recorders that can be expelled from an aircraft that would float on the surface of the water. This may help cut down on the times on the investigation and may help with clues as to why things have happened.
Okay, before we go, very briefly from you, our legal expert, Ms. Chin, at this stage, what kind of legal advice would you provide to those whose family members are missing?
Since the announcement was already made by the Department of Civil Aviation Malaysia, so as far as I'm concerned, I think the family members of the passengers may go through the negotiation with the airline company regarding the compensation. So this is something they have to do, although it's very tough for them to accept the fact that the passengers on board the craft, presumed dead. But so currently they needed to get the legal advice regarding what kind of elements of the damages should be claimed. So as you mentioned, they didn't get they happened to get the assistance from this office.
If they don't have any information to what is going on, how could they know what kind of rights they can claim? So that's probably an interesting question over there. We want to thank all of you for coming over to our program. Sure, the discussion will go on. We'll see eventually what the result is. Professor Qinghua being here with us in Beijing, and also Mr. Weiss and Mr. Robert Francis inside Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us. And stay with us here on World Insight. Our final segment is straight ahead. Drifting apart, Hong Kong residents, some of them are protesting against Chinese mainland tourists as the SAR considers reforming its voting system. Welcome back. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, or Hong Kong SAR, is looking at limiting the number of Chinese mainland tourists visiting its shore after some protests over their shopping habits. The SAR is inundated with mainlanders every year during the Spring Festival. They spend big bucks shopping while on holidays, but some Hong Kong citizens say they are pushing up the price of basic necessities. It comes as the SAR is looking at a reform plan for its electoral votes. CCTV's Li Jiejun reports.
Hong Kong protesters marching against mainlanders. They say mainland visitors are snapping up too many of their daily essentials. The increased buying has raised prices and caused product shortages. But the tourists are hitting back, with some starting an online campaign to boycott retail stores in Hong Kong and shop elsewhere. It's the latest in a series of tit-for-tats between both sides, which is becoming political. Hong Kong Chief Executive Leung Chun says he will lobby the National People's Congress to consider limiting the number of mainland visitors in the coming weeks. But the numbers are already falling. The recent Lunar New Year holiday saw the first drop in mainland visitor numbers in nearly 20 years. And the retail sales decreased about 15% year-on-year in January. Hong Kong tourism insiders say this is alarming.
From the anti-locust campaign by disgruntled Hong Kong residents last February to the recent anti-mainland shopper protests, these activities have discouraged tourists from the Chinese mainland as they've felt increasingly unwelcome in the city. So many have given up on Hong Kong.
Asked about the friction, the NPC spokeswoman Fu Ying said mainlanders and Hong Kong residents are brothers. They should respect each other and think more of each other's welfare. The debate comes as Hong Kong reaches the crossroads of political reform. Disputes over the election methods to be used to select the city's next chief executive triggered a 79-day occupation last year.
I want to stress that this decision is unshakable. I hope that Hong Kong can achieve universal suffrage as scheduled in accordance with this decision and the basic law, so that Hong Kong's constitutional reform can move forward rather than stand still.
The ACR government will end the second round public consultation on the universal suffrage on Saturday. It will submit a reform plan for the Legislative Council to vote, probably in June. But some legislators have vowed to veto any proposal based on Beijing's framework.
A recent poll shows that more than 60% of Hong Kong people think the Legislative Council should pass the government's reform plan. It seems they're willing to take what they can get in the further step. Li Jiejun, CCTV, Hong Kong.
During China's annual political gathering currently underway in Beijing, our reporter Zhang Nini asked some Hong Kong representatives about their views on a limit on Chinese mainland tourists.
Ms. Zhou, thank you for speaking to us. One of your proposals is to change the individual travel scheme for mainland tourists to Hong Kong. And in the past few months, there's been some high-profile examples of resentment and even anger towards mainland tourists. So what needs to be done to change this situation?
My proposal is really to not limit the individual travel scheme for all the cities on the mainland, but mainly to target the problem where it occurs, which is the multiple permit for the Shenzhen residents. Some of these frequent shoppers, they are creating a traffic which is much more than some of the areas can handle. And I think that is where, you get the clashes, you get the conflict. So what we've advocated is that since the average visit is 10 a year, for these multiple permit holders last year, we should use that as a ceiling figure. Immediately, the traffic from that group would somehow lower. And while that happens, I think that gives us room to open up to other cities on the mainland.
Interesting debate. For more on Hong Kong, we are now joined by Mr. Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of Center of International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics here in Beijing. And meanwhile, in Hong Kong, we are joined by Andrew Long, a longtime international China specialist. Welcome to both of you. First of all, Professor Liu, what do you make as a mainlander about the debate about whether Hong Kong should limit the numbers of Chinese mainland tourists to Hong Kong?
I think it's a different vision. The short-term vision, yes, the mainland visitors are pushing more of the envelope in Hong Kong by occupying more space and taking a share of the medical care system and restaurants, etc. But over a long term, it is part of the regionalization and globalization process where the human resources, including tourism, can be shared around the world. It's not only within China per se. And also on the economic term, definitely there's a plus when Hong Kong is not really performing very good for the last 5 years. And it's not only the tourists per se, but the tourism can also bring many more opportunities for interaction and for business opportunities, so which is quite a plus for shoring up the Hong Kong's economic performance.
All right. Mr. Long, are you looking at the short term or the long term, at least according to Professor Liu's theory?
Hello? You're asking me?
Of course.
Well, I think that let's first of all look at the numbers. Well, Hong Kong is a very, very small place with only 7 million inhabitants. But the number of visitors from the mainland has exceeded 45 million a year last year, and it's expected to grow to 47 million this year. So obviously there is a tremendous impact on Hong Kong's transport infrastructure, the reception facilities, and then the added problem is that most of these tourists from the mainland are concentrated on certain hotspots for shopping, and these creates a further problem, along with the perceived differences in culture, identities, and obviously there are all these problems need to be carefully managed. But on the other hand, Hong Kong needs to build its more facilities to welcome tourists. After all, Hong Kong is a very, very open society. And Hong Kong remains an attractive place to visit, not only for mainland visitors, for global visitors. Now, even during the height of the Occupy movement, mainland visitors kept on coming. So I don't think that the Occupy movement in Hong Kong acts as a barrier. But on the other hand, the facilities in Hong Kong are truly stretched, and then Hong Kong needs to broaden its tourist attractions.
I see.
And also try to manage the flow.
Mr. Lang, you seem to try to give all the answers, all the possibilities in one answer. It possibly is difficult, but let me ask you this. What does it mean to Hong Kong? Hong Kong boasts of itself as a place of free transportation, free flow of information, free flow of population, and ironically, it is putting a cap on the numbers of tourists from the same country where Hong Kong belongs to, China. And therefore, people are asking, what is going on in Hong Kong? Is Hong Kong going to, after putting a cap on tourists coming from the mainland, then putting a cap on tourists coming from the United States, from Japan, from the neighboring countries as well? And if that is not going to be the case, is it fair that mainland tourists are being singled out?
Well, I think, as I was saying, as I was referring to just now, there is a difference in culture. I mean, Hong Kong is a very Western society and has been so for over 100, past 150 years before the handover. But the culture, the kind of lifestyle, the kind of even perception of the government is quite different.
Well, we find quite a number of cultural differences when Chinese tourists traveling all over the world, not just in Hong Kong. Maybe the mainland tourists are a little bit different. Inside the United States, in Europe, in other parts of Asia, probably there's even more cultural differences. Probably Hong Kong is the least place that could claim there is, quote unquote, a cultural difference. After all, it's all Chinese culture. But let me ask you, Professor, how would you respond to the points raised by Mr. Long? Is it about, in a way, pushing the Chinese mainlanders outside Hong Kong? Or what is going on from your mainland perspective about the mentalities behind this?
Well, for Hong Kong, it is probably the most capitalistic place in the world. And what do the capitalists really like? Its customers, be it teenagers, be it farmers. As long as you bring the money, you are not here to enjoy the free lunch. So
well, they don't want the. Some are suggesting, at least, they don't want the money coming from mainlanders.
The structural problem in Hong Kong is that over the past decade, actually, there has been a sluggish growth due to the opening of the Chinese mainland market, and Hong Kong's position as a bridge or the springboard for the mainland economy is really diminishing. So therefore, which is at least part of the reason, and there has been the divide between the rich and poor has really been widened. Right. So the lower class people, they do not really see the benefit of opening to the mainland tourism. So therefore, they only feel that they are elbowed out in on the street, and much of the public utilities is not being further taken advantage by themselves. But however, I really could see that this prevents. This challenge really creates opportunity to push Hong Kong government to build more public utilities and to push the Hong Kong business people to create more margin for their business operation.
I see. We do have a number talking about the business operation. Before we go there, Mr. Long, it's only fair that I'd like you to respond. Criticism and opposition from some members of the society. Do you think that should be enough for the overall direction of Hong Kong to make a change? And if that change is being made, what does it mean to the nature of Hong Kong over the past, shall we say, 100 years, which is a free port?
Well, I think it's not just a question of tourists from the mainland. In fact, it highlights the kind of contradictions under one country and two systems. And of course, this is also the debate has been energized by the current electoral reform, which is still coming against all sorts of different opinions, and various parties are digging their heels in. But then coming back to the question of tourism, as I was saying in the beginning, it's just the huge numbers in the beginning. I mean, Hong Kong is a very, very small place, and the facilities are limited, and all of a sudden Hong Kong people see the swarm of tourists coming from mainland, concentrating on certain areas, buying up a lot of the daily necessities, which Hong Kong, say the milk powder, for example, and also bidding up the office rents in certain areas, and because there is a vast number of people coming from the mainland who buy very expensive watches and diamonds and jewelry and so on and so forth. That was before the anti-corruption campaign. So there was a huge demand for these kind of commodities, and that translates into huge rental increase and then a lot of the traditional shops have to close down
let's
to make
take a
way
look.
for all these
yes,
other
Mr.
shops.
Lang, let's take a look at whether the traditional shops are having some negative influence. Some say that spending on mainland tourists mainly benefits the big shopping malls owners rather than smaller retailers. They say this is the reason behind this. Some opposition inside Hong Kong against the mainland tourists. Let's take a look at some of the figures here. Individual mainland tourists, so those not with a tour group, who spent nearly 110 billion Hong Kong dollars in the year 2013. That's less than 12 times of what was spent in the year 2004. But despite that, statistics show that the income of local Hong Kong families increased by only 9% between 1998 and 2013. Poverty grew by 40%, while the real estate index rose 90%, and daily goods like beef is now twice as expensive. So, Mr. Lang, here's the question. When you close your door, you're likely to do better?
Well, naturally, Hong Kong is a very, very economically unequal city. According to some estimates, 1% of the Hong Kong population owns something like 80% of Hong Kong's wealth, including property values. But this is not only a Hong Kong phenomenon. I mean, inequalities are happening in many different countries.
So my question to you is, when you close your door, are you going to do better? Very briefly, and then we have to wrap it up because of time limits. Very briefly from you, Mr. Lang. Will you close your door, are you going to do better?
Well, I think that Hong Kong has got to, as I was saying, diversify the tourists. We need longer-term stayers rather than people just shopping for one single day and going back. But if you look, we learn from foreign experience. For example,
right, we have to wrap it up for now.
There's a village.
Okay, we have to wrap it up for now.
Oxford.
Sir, thank you very much for your input. I'm sure that discussion will continue, and my program will still going to feature these kinds of discussions in the near future as things evolve. But I want to thank both of you, both coming from mainland and Hong Kong. Both are belonging to the Chinese culture, and we see an interesting debate going on over there. Andrew Leung from Hong Kong, and also Professor Liu Baocheng here in Beijing. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the two of you. And that is all the time we have for today. We'd like to know what you think about our program. And if you want to see more of our program, World Insight team, you can visit our website. I'm Tian Wei for myself and my colleagues here. Thanks for watching. Join us again on Monday for more global perspectives and stories from across China and around the world. Good night.